Welcome to the Kingsway Podcast.
Yo.
Excited you are here. Thanks so much for joining us again. We're back at it, Jed.
Here we are.
Ready, running, gunning. Here we go.
I wasn't sure if you were going with alliteration and all of them were going to start with R, or if you were going to start rhyming. You've been rapping a lot.
I've been rapping a lot this morning. I have been. I've been throwing it down. A part of why I think I got rap on the mind. I've got my dad game on point this week.
Yeah.
Kids got camp. I got all three kids to myself, and
There you go.
I gotta have some rhythm, some rhyme, some like energy in my life, and so I've been cranking it. My kids, I'm pretty sure my kids are like, "What are you doing?" And I'm just like, "We're on a ride, kids. Here we go." Well, we're gonna do a segment that we've done a few times, and I know you're scouring the internet right now.
Yeah.
I love this segment. It's one of my favorites. I think we get more comments and I get more things off of it, in the sense of like private, like DMs or messages or text messages, because I think these context clues are some of the easiest things for us to kind of reclaim some truth, get some good discussion, talk through some things. And I know for me personally, they're also healthy to remind myself of why sometimes I have some incredible interactions with the Bible that I need to unlearn, kind of tear down some stuff, and then rebuild the truth back into my life. Quick mention, one of my friends just started a church, and it's in Vermont. And I heard his sermon yesterday, and I just want to do this before we even get into the verse. I thought it was really, really cool. It's called Love 802. Vermont is one of the least Christian states in the entire country.
Really?
Yeah, fewest amount of people that would claim that they believe in God. And the area code for Vermont is actually all 802 for the entire state.
The whole state?
The whole state.
Wow, okay.
So they're calling it Love 802, and they started the church yesterday. And one of the things that he mentioned in there that I just thought was so cool, and I just know there are a lot of people that have had some sad things happen, or that are disappointed with where we're at and that we're not recovering fast enough, or maybe have had lost a loved one or had some sickness or hurts, just disappointment. And he had been at hospice, basically chaplain for over 2 years before he started this church. And so his first sermon was on blessed are those that mourn, out of Matthew chapter 5, from Jesus. And what he said was, and he had multiple points, but the thing that just stuck with me is he said, grief is an ocean, not a race. And those that understand why it's a blessed are those that mourn recognize that there are waves, and there are times that you feel like you're going to drown and that it's endless. And then there are other times that it's smooth sailing and you feel like it's just beautiful and that you'll be fine. But a lot of times in grief and a lot of times in our hurts and our pains, we try to make it like a race where we put mile markers and a finish line. And that's just not how grief works at all. And so he was talking about with people that, he had 30 funerals last year, and, meeting with family and talking with people that, they have one foot in this world and one foot in the next, and trying to help people navigate that. And I just thought that was a poignant thing that has stuck with me since yesterday. And I know if you're watching things online and you're checking services out, maybe you're checking ours out, or you're going to go over to Love 802 and check them out. His name's Braden. I encourage you to let something stick with you for longer than that day. I just think it's healthy if you have something that sticks with you longer than just that hour that you're thinking about, that's gotten into your soul. So wherever you're listening to, whatever your sermon or whatever digital things you are consuming, if it doesn't stick with you for longer than a day, I don't think it has an impact really in your life. And so I don't know. That was just something that stuck with me, and I thought it was worth saying before we get into a verse that you need to. I'm trying to practice that. I think it'd be good for everybody else to try that too. So, grief's an ocean, not a race. What do you got a context clue for us? I know it was a hard intro.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a couple ideas here. We can start with this one. This one, I forgot we had this comment come in.
Yeah.
On I think the last context clues we did.
I like that.
When we talked about Galatians. So
yeah,
I'm gonna look this up. This is 1 John 3:18.
The 1 John. I always love when you say this to me, and then it's like a race to find.
I know.
I'm like, can I do it without making a mistake? I think I can.
1 John 3. 18. All right. So this says, little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth.
And then 19 says, this is how you know we belong to the truth, how we set our hearts at the rest in his presence. If our hearts condemn us, then we know that God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. So mine says, dear children. Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. So what was the comment? It was just like they want context to this, or
now,
what?
The comment on this says, I think maybe they were applying this to the last context clues we did, which was in Galatians 5:13. Now I'm trying to remember back to what that was.
I was going to say, I'm trying to remember what Galatians 5:13 was, because otherwise I can't do it. And, this might be contrary to most people's opinions, but I don't have perfect memory. Yeah. I don't always remember everything that we did. 5:13. I'll know it as soon as I don't do references as much as I do. We're called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh, but rather to serve one another in humble love. Okay, so they're just attaching... Yeah. They're attaching Paul's thoughts in Galatians to John's thoughts in John.
Yeah, so maybe we
John
don't.
3.
Maybe we do, maybe we don't jump into and really talk through 1 John 3:18, but at least it'd be good to kind of talk about the connections between those. And
yeah, I mean, that's that old quote, right? Preach the word every day, and if necessary, use words.
Yeah,
right. Preach the gospel every day, and if necessary,
use words.
Yeah. That's I think that's the context. I know that John, that context for that verse too, though, is the verse before it. So if you're like, what is he talking about? There's more to the context, but it really is. If any of you has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person?
Yeah. So I mean, that whole paragraph there, 16, 17, 18, I think 16 even adds even more weight to it. That's the, by this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers.
Yeah. So he didn't just say it; he did something about it. Yeah. And I think that's the whole point. And obviously, John's the last. He's the last apostle alive at this point, and most likely is watching the church be born and then start to be like a teenager, and like going like, hey, like, don't just talk about these great things, or don't just read my gospel. You know what I mean? Like, or don't just listen to the truth, but like do it and like live it out. So, I do think there's incredible context to that I think also points out kind of John's whole message from his gospel that we've been talking to. So that's good. All right. Well, that was a neat kind of attachment to that, almost like a reference to what Paul's talking about too. Yeah. And what's another context clue that we can jump into, or that would be a good one to do?
This speaks into how prepared I am coming into these things, because I'm scrambling a little bit here.
No problem. I have a couple, but I don't know if I want to do. The context clues are like the we've hit a couple of the large ones. Philippians 4. We hit the Jeremiah 29:11. We hit Matthew 6:33. We've hit Galatians. That was a good one as well.
Yeah, that one was fun.
I like the 2 Corinthians where Paul mentions this thorn in the flesh and this concept.
I had that one just here.
I like that one a lot. There's just so many. The thing about the context. So, for example, one of the ones I was thinking about is Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus says, "Hey, first remove." The plank out of your own eye before you remove the speck from your brother's. Yeah. The context of that is it's a joke, and it's meant to be seen as sarcasm, and it's meant to actually be a biting remark in the sense of like how easy it is to see the speck and miss the plank, not necessarily even like a judgmental statement of like hey, like you need to do this. It's more of like you recognize that this normally is how it goes. Like you knock your friend out with the plank that's in your own eye, trying to help him. Yeah. Like you miss and do not recognize your own issues. Context clues has always been, I think, in my mind, though, the verses that people try to harness in the wrong ways. Yeah. And I try to harness in the wrong ways for my own agenda, for my own leverage, or for my own advantage. We try to take a verse and go, okay, so this gives me permission to be angry. This gives me
Yeah.
permission to be judgmental. This gives me confidence outside of the gospel, you know, and like my own actions or like my own control. And so what I've always loved about the verses that we've tried to find is like, we're trying to find verses that kind of do that take something and leverage it. Let's do 2 Corinthians with Paul.
Done.
Let's do that.
2
I
Corinthians
really think
12.
that would be a healthy one. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. If you haven't read this section, this is where Paul is doing one of his latest letters, giving context to this. And we'll read the verse here. Why don't you go ahead and read the verse that we're talking about in chapter 12, specifically about this thorn, but then also the response that he gets, and that gets quoted the most.
Yeah. So I'll read 8 and 9.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So I'll do 7, 8, and 9. In 7, starting in 7, he says, "So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me.'"
So I guess the context clue or the context that I would love to is just that my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. This is in the worst case scenarios when I've heard this quoted, this is permission to sin.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is the like, hey, when I'm at my worst, that's when God's at his
Yeah.
best. You know, and like when you're in the middle of something that you're doing terribly, you're like, you read this out in your mind, you're like, it doesn't matter, that's how God works. You know, and like you can kind of almost find your own agenda in it. But where I feel like this gets misinterpreted maybe on the more innocent side rather than on the more prideful side is where we read this and we feel devalued and we feel like we're trash and that we're really not, we're always going to be weak and that there's nothing we can do. And so just needing to trust in God. And so it almost is like this, this broken thing inside of Paul that is trying to steal his confidence.
Yeah.
And we let this verse almost do that unintentionally. Yeah. It steals our self-worth. It steals our confidence. It steals our ability to almost believe that we can do better. And I feel it almost like what it was meant to be an encouragement to Paul. We read that and it ends up being like a condemning, like affirming of our negative feelings. And almost like, we'll always be weak. It's just how that's all we're going to be. And I felt that myself with this verse where I'm like, all right, the thorn in the flesh, messenger of Satan, you know, the advocate that's against God, that satanic snake of a voice that slithers into your mind, right? And whispers the things that twist the ways that God feels about you, sees the world and interprets the world. Like that is in it. Now, whether that is a physical ailment that Paul's dealing with, whether it's his eyesight, wounds from the beatings and shipwrecks and all the things that he's been in, whether it's something more than that, whether it's just the pride and the legalism that just seems to sneak back into his life where he just judges people very quickly and he feels himself going back to like this wanting to be a certain way. We don't know. And I think him not clarifying is actually helpful for us finding ourselves in that story. Yeah. You know, when you think about this first, do you have anything that you attach to, or like what do you? Is there anything more than maybe what I mentioned that you feel like the context kind of gets ripped out of, or does it feel pretty close to that?
I definitely hear what you're saying, and I agree with that. I think for me, it's never been like permission to sin, but almost an encouragement when I do. Like, and what I've always kind of wondered about is the real meaning behind like my grace is sufficient. Like, you know, just taking it at face value, it's like it's enough. You know, like it's but
barely,
like barely. That's like the connotation I get from sufficient is like it's just barely reaching the edge.
And that's a poor translation, I think, because that's not. I would be curious of what it would be in the or in the ESV.
This is the ESV.
Or is that ESV? Because in the NIV it's the same way. I'm wondering though. So like I'm wondering, and I don't know the Greek in the context of this. I'm wondering if that sufficient word though is like a heretical almost like a comical version of that
Yeah.
word, where it's like, buddy, it's sufficient.
sufficient.
You know what I mean? Like almost
yeah.
like that tone
It's
of
enough, yeah.
like you're never going to use this up.
Yeah.
It's way more
Yeah.
than you need. And so where we see like, oh, barely, that was sufficient.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the context of the tone and what it's being communicated in the Greek is actually more of a like, more of a overstatement rather than an understatement.
Yeah.
But I get how my mood and what I bring with the expectation of that verse
Yeah.
can change that word very quickly, right? So I barely.
yeah.
Thank goodness His grace was just enough.
Yeah.
I get that.
So in this kind of, if you use YouVersion for stuff, they'll have these, they're almost like little text box above the text itself.
Little reference things.
Yeah, you can click on it, and it basically acts like a footnote or what might be like in the margins in your physical
like a
Bible.
small reference.
And they sent me to Isaiah 40:29 through 31.
Okay.
Which I think backs up what you were saying a little bit. But Isaiah says here, he says, he gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. So it's not, it's exactly what you're saying. It's not like, going off of that, I know that likely Paul may not have been referencing directly Isaiah,
Nah,
but you get that idea, of just like,
well, and I think that gives us the context clue.
Yeah.
It really, the attitude that I think when you come at this verse with the right mindset and with the right attitude is Paul is trying to finish the race, right?
Yeah.
That's what he would tell Timothy later, one of his last letters, like, I want to finish strong. I'm trying to finish. And there's this thing in my life that just constantly is pulling me away from finishing well. And so the weakness that he's feeling, I think I like to put sinfulness in there, but really I think what he's trying to say is like consistency, or like longevity, or like contentment. He's trying to get to a place where he is actually moving in the same direction, finishing strong, having the power to kind of finish the race. And so when he says, my grace is sufficient for you, my power is made perfect in weakness, he's basically saying like, the longer you walk with me, the stronger your faith gets. And it may feel like you're getting weaker, but the more confidence you should have in what I can do. And I think, I don't know, I've not met many men or women that are later in life that aren't more aware, if they are healthy people, of how far they have fallen from what they should have been. In fact, I would say that most men specifically that I talk to that are 50, 60, or 70 years old, they say things like, I don't deserve the accolation. I don't deserve, the accolation, is that a word? Accolades? Accolation. I don't deserve the praise or like the accommodation that most people give to me in the sense of like respect and honor. I don't see myself that way. I wonder if I did enough, said enough, or was enough, and I wonder if that's Paul's thing too here, where he recognizes that he was a part of killing Stephen, part of killing a lot of others. He knows that it's cost the church a lot already for him being there. And I think he wonders if he's having an impact at all.
Yeah.
And I could just see that as being a later life question for him, where he's like, I just have this voice in the back of my head that says like, you're not ever going to amount to anything. What you're doing is not going to have an impact. What you're doing is just, it's like dust in the wind. And God's just like, no, what you can't see, I can. What you can't do, I'm moving in. I was talking with Jesse, one of who we've had on the podcast, and he was talking about the amount of money that it would have taken to have the paper and then the supplies to write the letters that Paul did would have been a huge economic, toll. And Paul had to have the resources in order to do this and write. But the illiteracy that was at the time, it was like writing in computer code. for this day and age. Like, how many people are actually going to be able to read this in MDOS, and like how many people are actually going to read this in Java and like know what I said. And like, you can't see the thousands and thousands and millions of people that are going to read. And so he's just going like, I'm writing all this, I'm spending all this money, I'm getting beat up and shipwrecked and going around the world, and I'm getting old, and now all I hear is the voice of the devil just telling me it's not worth it. That's the context that I feel like I read this verse in, where my darkest, weakest moments, God's enough.
Yeah.
And when I feel weak and like my efforts haven't been sufficient, his grace and his power is. And I think Paul would want us to feel that way about that verse. I think he writes it in there intentionally as a humble moment, which is so different from his early writings.
Yeah.
This is such a vulnerable moment for him to kind of reveal that. And I love that about Paul. You can tell he's growing too. And his walk with God is getting deeper and is growing, especially when you see the Timothy letters. And you can just tell he's trying so hard to be kind and gentle and to encourage Timothy. But yeah, no, it's a great one. I'm glad we chose to kind of walk down this. I mean, any thoughts? Would you agree with everything I said? Would you go a different direction with it? Maybe not a full different direction?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'd go a full different direction. I think I definitely agree with, we do just have that tendency to apply this directly to our sin. And I think there's some like comfort in this verse for that. And when you do sin, like, because I mean, I don't think it's like a fallacy or wrong to say that.
And we don't know that it wasn't a sin.
Yeah.
That Paul wasn't sinning. We don't know that.
But we have like, everywhere else, like, the words of Jesus himself to back that up, that, the grace of God is enough for our sin. Is more than enough.
I mean, we just talked about that in John 12, right? Like, come into the light, and like those that are in the light, there's enough. Like, Jesus has done and paid for everything. And
but I do think it is a limiter to apply it only to the sin. I think I mean, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the second half of that I'll boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses.
Yes.
Not even just realizing that my weaknesses don't even matter in the long run, that like, that God's grace is sufficient for it, but even just being like, that word boast is like a prideful thing, like being proud of my weakness and the way that God's grace shines and is proven through that. Like, and
I think you can feel Paul doing that several times in his letters, right? Like, he knows he's not the best preacher. He knows that he's not like the most, like, his physical prowess is evidently he's very short and bald and like not good looking. He gets called Hermes, I think, in one of the cities in Acts. And like, which is
they think the other guy with him is like Zeus.
Like, Barnabas is Hermes. Zeus and he's Hermes, which if you look up Hermes, like, he is like the like Cupid. He's almost like this like short bald baby. Like, I don't know, like of the Greek mythology. So, I know for him, he feels like the guy that has to prove himself. And he probably has his whole life. Yeah. And, he's probably
you come out of like killing everybody, and then all of a sudden I'm on your side.
And his status and everything's lost. And, we don't know if his family ever, we just don't know.
Yeah.
So I agree with you 1,000% too. When he says boast, I love that. That's the pride and the pride side and the positive, in the sense of like pride in who God is and what he can do. And, but I love the humility in that.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it. It's like pride in God and humble approach. No, the side of that, I think, is that openness that we've talked about a lot. Like, loving people right where they're at and not being fake. I think I've said that from stage 2 weeks in a row, like, being fully known and fully loved at the same time. That is the beauty of the gospel.
Yeah.
Like, that's the power of the gospel. And like, that's the only place you can truly be fully known and fully loved at the same time is with Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot, and no person in your life you will ever confess everything. Even if you tried, you would forget.
Yeah.
Like, you just wouldn't forget. You wouldn't be able to say it all. And so I think for him to say, I boast in my weakness, it's him knowing that even has limitations in the sense of what he can do, but that comical sufficiency of grace is more than enough. And I think that ultimately that's one of the things I think about a lot of this, where we've talked about this multiple times. We have a focus most of the time on a sinful area of our life, but we're completely unaware of a lot of areas that are sinful. And so even though sometimes we feel the thorn, we got bruises and rotten spots that we haven't even got to yet. And Jesus is sufficient for those as well.
Yeah.
And my weaknesses in the places. And maybe that's more of what Paul's going, like, I've had this my whole life and Jesus already took care of it. And I'm trying to work on it, but he's already there and he's already been at work in it. And I'll boast all the more that I know that the next time he's going to do the same thing. I'm going to find another area of weakness and he's going to do the same thing. His grace is going to come in and it's been sufficient without my even knowledge of it. And so I know in my life as I mature, I don't find myself going, man, I'm just getting a whole lot more holy. I find myself going, man, Jesus is a whole lot more holy than I thought. And he's worthy of following. And he does his work in me, but I don't know if my holiness is the thing that grows as much as his. And his ability, and maybe that's.
It reminds me of that C.S. Lewis quote: the test of when you're in the presence of God is you either become, or you're either made aware of how dirty you are, or you're just completely in awe of like how holy he is. Yeah.
And Isaiah seemed to be in both.
Yeah.
Right. Send me of unclean lips. Yeah. So no, I agree. There's a balance in that, and Paul seems to ride that pretty well.
Yeah,
he really does. Yeah. You're right. Well, man, this has been good. I hope that any questions on this, I hope you put in the comments. We'd love other verses to try to attack. I know that we had, I think I have one or two others that I'm going to save and not say now, but we'll throw those out. Good discussion. Again, grace is an ocean, or, grief is an ocean, I should say, not a race. It's a good thing. Take away something for the digital, whatever we talked about today. Take a comment away from what we did. Take a piece of the verse. Take one of the references. Just, take something away digitally, put it somewhere, write it somewhere. Let it be something that soaks into your heart. Maybe it is that just, you're just right. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 8 and 9 on somewhere. And you're like, look, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. I boast all the more in that weakness so that Christ may be glorified, so that Christ will be lifted up, so his power may be fully seen. So, man, this has been fun. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back at it next week. I think next week we're doing an off the cuff.
Yeah.
I got some good questions. So, hope to see you then. Till then, have a great and glorious day in the Lord. We'll see you later.